Episode 4 has just dropped for Amazon's The Lord of the Rings of Power, which is jam-packed with many little lore Easter eggs and surprises, and many references to Eregion the Mariner, to say the least. Here is the breakdown and review of episode 4, including Easter egg spotting too, but without further ado, let's get right into it. We begin with one of the biggest moments and omens of the episode, which is in fact the first scene where Queen Regent Miriel is having a planted dream of the downfall of Numenor whilst blessing newborn mothers, and we see the city crumble. Specifically, we see the petals of the white tree fall and blow in the wind, which seems to be a bad omen for Miriel, which we see mirrored later on in this scene right at the end, when it actually happens again, but in real life, when Galadriel leaves the island kingdom on boat. We are then introduced to Kemen, the son of Pharazôn, who really seems to be his understudy at the minute, and notifies him of an elf-hating mob growing in the city centre, led by Mr. Lowman himself from the last episode, who got quite beaten up by Halbrand. In Pharazôn's speech, we get another name drop of Elros Tarminiata himself, and interestingly, Pharazôn swears to the crowd that, quote, elves will never take Numenor's helm. But then right at the end, we see him give no pushback or resistance to Miriel's elf supporting decision. This might be for a tactical reason that hopefully gets explained to us later on. Even greater, we get an Menelaos name drop when mentioning the men building the capital to the ground, and interestingly, Menelaos is not mentioned in the Lord of the Rings or the appendices. Then a second later, when we see the beginning of the arc between Kemen and Eregion, we get a Meneltarma name drop, which is the highest mountain peak in Numenor. We get another Narrator reference when Valandil says, quote, the West, the real Numenor, the things that your brother used to spew, end quote. And we are starting to see more and more references to Narrator, and even we are starting to get a better understanding into his character, as Narrator seems like a true elf-loving faithful patriot who likes to live on the western shores. Finally, at long last, we get a visible introduction to the man, or due to his ears we should say the elf himself, Adar, who truly seems corrupted with a noticeable scar on his right cheek. We can see how much the orcs adore him, when even at death this orc still looks up to the elf before he gutted him. Then Adar speaks in Quenya to Aronde and reminisces of his time in Beleriand, so this all but confirms now that he is a twisted and corrupted elf from Beleriand. He states, quote, I went down that river once, when I was young, I remember. The banks were covered in sage blossoms, miles of them. The main two rivers these could be is Sirion or Gelion rivers. Interestingly, he lets Aronde go to send a message and actually frees him, and this message is sent to the Tirharad folk who are now at Osterith Watchtower, and this message says they have to submit to his rule and relinquish their lands under his new world, or otherwise they would be killed. Also, during this scene when Bronwyn is surprised at how many villagers are coming, she specifically mentioned, quote, every village from here to Orodruin, which is a nice little sneaky Easter egg, as Orodruin is another name for Mount Doom. Theo and Annoying Boy 1 go back to their old village, which is now deserted but scattered with almost satanic and ritualistic like killings of many animals, and due to the sunlight, which plays an important role in this episode, results in the orcs being in hiding in this village. But then, when they do come, they are indeed looking for this sword, which Theo now activates with his blood from his arm. But then at last we come to Celebrimbor in Eregion, and we see the progress of the Grand Tower, which will house a splendid forge at the top. In this conversation we get the first of a few mentions of Elendil, Elrond's father, with Celebrimbor speaking about actually talking to him in the past. We then see Elrond's foresight come into play when he translates, quote, the old mine below the Mirrormere, which is where we soon find out is a place for the mining of mithril, and Elrond interestingly swears an oath on the memory of his father again to keep this a secret. This could maybe result in a little division between Elrond and Gil-galad, his High King. If he keeps this oath, time will tell. But there seems to be something down there which causes the mineshaft and cave to collapse on the dwarves. Funnily enough, when Durin says to Elrond, quote, "To your last days on this Middle-earth," it's quite similar to the late great Sir Christopher Lee's line as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movies. Back in Numenor here we see Kemen basically ask Eregion out on a date, but soon enough we come to Galadriel and Halbrand caged, where Halbrand says some pretty coincidental things, quote, "You do well to identify what your opponent most fears." Then Galadriel quickly says, quote, "and exploit it," but then Halbrand interestingly explains further, "No, give them a means of mastering it, so that you can master them." And this directly parallels, and now maybe in the show even foreshadows, the forging of the rings, as Annatar gives Celebrimbor the means of mastering his craft in ring making, but due to Annatar's taint on all the rings created by Celebrimbor, and eventually the power and control of the One Ring itself, Annatar also then mastered Celebrimbor and all the ring holders. This could be a very obvious misdirection tactic into making us, the lore fans and hardcore fans, think Halbrand is Sauron, but we shall see. And we do in fact see again soon, as Halbrand manipulates the whole situation further as well, as he says a word or two into Pharazôn's ear telling him to show restraint, which is quite manipulative indeed. While Isildur and Eregion are eating, could that be the worm in the background painting? We at last see Tar-Planta in the tower, who is bedridden, old and sickly, and can't even open his eyes, but he apparently has a vision / prophecy which first involves an elf, which is Galadriel, arriving on the island. In the lore we know Tar-Planta had the foresight to tell that when the petals of the white tree died and withered away, then so would the line of kings of Numenor. This is mostly the same thing, but they have also now made it as some sort of a prophecy of some sorts, which includes Galadriel somehow. During the scene at the top of the tower, we see some nice little lore Easter eggs, firstly with Beren and Luthien in the background, with them holding the Silmaril. Then we get a glimpse of Thor's hammer, Damboleg, but then most interestingly, do we see the sword itself, Narsil, in the background to the left of Galadriel when she is speaking. The sword's design looks almost similar to the Peter Jackson movie Narsil sword, and if so, it's quite exciting and a nice little early Easter egg for us fans, and maybe the sword won't be prominent until seasons to come. Arondir comes back and saves the day and rescues Theo, and then again we see the effect of sunlight when the orcs can't make it out of the forest. We then get a hearty scene between Elrond, Durin and Disa, where Elrond encourages Durin to speak and cherishes moments with his father when he has the chance, as he couldn't do the same to his own, who of course is Erendil now, with the 4th reference in this episode alone. This leads to Durin making up with his father, who was placing limits and then hold to the mining, and Durin asks his father if he can go to Lindon, and he says yes, so that is probably setting up the scene for the next episode. Crazily enough, we find out that the shed Theo took the Sauron marked sword from was from Waldreg's shed, who similar to Theo has a mark of Sauron on his arm, and we learn that the sword is a power, quote, fashioned by our ancestors for his master's own hand, and we later learn that this master is Sauron. Waldreg interestingly thinks Meteor Man's arrival via comet in the sky is a sign for Sauron's arrival, and that they now both need to be ready for his arrival. As discussed at the start with the opening scene, we end with Miriel changing her mind and accompanying Galadriel back to Middle-earth, with Isildur, who also volunteers to join the army alongside his 2 friends. Let us know of your thoughts and reactions to episode 3 in the comments below, alongside your favourite Easter egg or any Easter eggs that we missed. Episode 3 and 4 have been much stronger episodes And the better thing about episode 4 was the pacing, and it felt like we have left the initial groundwork of lore building and introductions behind, as we are now in the full flow of the story. Joseph Morley's character Adar was excellent in this episode, so glad that we're finally seeing him on screen alongside Tristan Gravel's brilliant performance as Farazon too. Thank you guys for watching, we really appreciate it. Make sure to like and subscribe until the next video my friends, goodbye.